Walker was about 6'4", so he could back guys in like Oscar Robertson.
A lot of colleges that played against us had a hard time matching up with him.
Most guys prefer to go to their left or their right, or they have trademarks that you can hopefully use in terms of defensing them. But in Jimmy's case, he was laying 4 or 5 moves on you every 12 seconds.
If you said that Jimmy Walker was a star at Providence, that would probably be the understatement of the century. He was a lightning-quick 6'3" guard with a scorer's mentality, as his jumper was so pure that you thought every attempt would go in, no matter how hard the defense tried. His advanced dribbling skills and change of pace made him extremely difficult to guard. He had so many moves that you really couldn't game plan for him, but the most underrated part was that he was efficient, despite his volume. His all-around game drew comparisons to the Big O, and after becoming a 2-time All-American and leading the nation in scoring as a senior, Jimmy was the first pick of the 1967 draft by the Pistons, even though they already had Dave Bing. His career got off to a slow start, but by year 5, he was averaging 21 points a game and had been named an All-Star for the 2nd time. It seemed like he would finally realize his potential, but it just never materialized for one reason or another. Most people know Jimmy because of the relationship, or lack thereof, with his son Jalen Rose, but in terms of on-the-court matters, his dominance in college was something that will never be forgotten. Welcome to PC Hoops, and let's get down to it. Jimmy Walker was born on April 8, 1944 in Amherst, Virginia. He grew up in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, a place that really wasn't a healthy environment for him. Jimmy's gifts on the court would catch the eyes of Satch Sanders and Sam Jones, who saw him play as a sophomore at Boston Trade School. Once they talked with Jimmy and played against him, they saw potential that nobody else around him did. Sam invested in the kid's future, setting him up for 2 years at the Laurinburg Academy, a black prep school in North Carolina with a rich history of turning out professional athletes. Jimmy would play well enough to earn a scholarship to Providence, where his life would change forever. The Friars had a solid team heading into 1964, as Jimmy joined Mike Reardon, Dexter Westbrook, James Benedict, and his cousin Bill Blair. James would honor Sam for all he had done for him by wearing 24 on his jersey. They would have an unbelievable start to the season, winning their first 17 games before losing to Villanova. But that was their only blemish, as they would win out their schedule to finish 20-1. The Friars made the tournament and faced West Virginia in their first round game, and Jimmy had a modest 14 points, 3 rebounds, and 5 assists in a blowout win. The next game against Villanova was a little closer, but they still came out on top, as Jimmy dropped 20 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists. Providence faced Princeton with a trip to the Final Four on the line, but they would get destroyed by the Tigers, losing by 40 points as Bill Bradley dropped 41 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists. Jimmy's sophomore year was still a success, as he averaged 21 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists. The Friars weren't as dominant as they were in 1964, but they were still a tough team to beat, winning 10 straight games at one point in the season. Jimmy was the catalyst for most of their success, as fans likened his moves to Oscar Robertson. The Friars' offense mostly consisted of Jimmy's teammates heading towards the baseline, giving him space to go one-on-one with his matchup, as most defenders were toast at this point. He really shined in the Holiday Basketball Festival, an in-season tournament played at Madison Square Garden. In the title game, they faced a Bob Cousy-coached Boston College team, but Jimmy was unconscious, dropping 50 points to give Providence the win, as he was named the MVP of the tournament. The Friars' 21-4 finish secured them another tournament bid against St. Joseph's. Jimmy had a decent performance with 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists, but Providence shot 37% as a team, and they only put up 48 points in a blowout loss. Jimmy received national recognition for his production, being named a first-team All-American, averaging 25 points, 7 rebounds, and 6 assists. Jimmy had the ultimate green light as a senior, and he would have a season for the ages. The Friars couldn't win more than 4 games in a row this year, but they would win the Holiday Basketball Festival again, with Jimmy being named the MVP for the 2nd time. He would go off for 45 against Rhode Island and 47 against Holy Cross. By season's end, Jimmy led the nation in scoring. However, the Friars didn't make the tournament. He averaged 30 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists as Providence played in the NIT instead. He was up to 36 points in overtime of the quarterfinal game against Marquette, but he missed a last-second jump shot to win the game, as according to him, this was the only thing that went wrong for him in Madison Square Garden. Jimmy had taken the basketball world by storm, so he was taken first overall by the Pistons in the 1964 NBA draft. He was also taken first overall by the Pacers in the inaugural ABA draft. He was such a great athlete that he was taken with the last pick of the NFL draft by the Saints, even though he had never played college football. Jimmy chose the NBA, signing a 4-year, $250,000 contract. But there was one problem. The Pistons already had Dave Bing, who played a similar style to Jimmy, as coach Donnie Butcher felt like two players of that mold couldn't coexist, so Jimmy was buried deep in the rotation. Even though he was picked ahead of players like Earl Monroe, Walt Frazier, and Mel Daniels, his playing time was erratic. He dropped 10 points and 10 assists in his pro debut, while dropping 27 points and 5 rebounds on the Bulls. There were times where Jimmy would play 35 minutes one game, and then average 10 minutes over the next 4, and this inconsistency messed up his rhythm. Jimmy had 6 20-point games, and 16 games with at least 5 assists, but he shot below 40% from the field in his rookie season. On the contrary, Dave was amazing as a sophomore, putting up 27 points a game, as he and DeBusschere helped Detroit finish 40-42, making their first playoff appearance in 5 years. Jimmy's shaky rookie season saw him average 9 points, 2 rebounds, and 3 assists. Detroit faced Boston in the semifinals, as Jimmy played well in the reserve role, even dropping 22 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists in 27 minutes in Game 3. But the Celtics were the better team, winning the series in 6. The Pistons needed a center, so they selected Otto Moore with the 6th pick in 1968. Questions about Jimmy's dedication arose as he arrived to training camp noticeably overweight. It took him a few games to work himself back into shape, and the doubt started creeping in. However, he did have a nice stretch early on in the season, dropping 3 30-point games in November. But the Pistons were still struggling, and Otto wasn't really playing well. So in a desperate move to upgrade, Coach Butcher traded Jimmy to the Knicks for Walt Bellamy. But after he was suddenly fired before the trade was finalized, new coach Paul Seymour nixed the trade, insisting that New York take Dave DeBusschere instead. This was partly because Dave was really close to the owner, and Paul feared that he could get him fired at the drop of a hat. But even though Paul had kept Jimmy, that didn't mean he wanted to play him, famously saying, "Why should I have to wet nurse a guy who signed a contract for $250,000? Jimmy was still showing up in spurts, dropping 30 points and 7 assists against the Rockets, and 31 points and 9 assists on 12 of 16 shooting against the Suns. He had 14 20-point games, and his efficiency increased by a lot, but his production was well below his draft status, and the naysayers were plentiful. It also didn't help that the Pistons regressed dramatically, only winning 32 games, as Jimmy averaged 12 points, 2 rebounds, and 3 assists. Detroit hired a new head coach in 1969, selecting Butch Van Bredekoff, who didn't see an issue with Jimmy and Dave playing at the same time. Jimmy was finally given a starting role and he blossomed. He put up 29 points and 5 rebounds against Philly, and 32 points, 7 rebounds, and 9 assists against Phoenix. He was really hot in December, averaging 26 points on 47% shooting. His scoring prowess earned him an all-star selection. He finished the season ranked 16th in total points and 11th in free throw percentage. Dave was still elite, but with Walt missing so much time with injury, the Pistons were in the basement, finishing 31-51. Jimmy's much improved season saw him average 21 points, 3 rebounds, and 3 assists. The Pistons got the #1 pick again in 1970, selecting Bob Lanier from St. Bonaventure. Jimmy started out the season on a good note, averaging 21 points and 4 assists through the first 10 games. He dropped 38 points and 5 rebounds against the Suns, and 34 points on 60% shooting against the Bulls. Jimmy was pretty consistent throughout the year, dropping 31 20-point games and 20 games with at least 5 assists. However, his numbers were down, and so was his efficiency, but his previous all-star form had quieted the doubters, for now. Dave was one of the top scorers in the league again, as Bob had a solid rookie season, considering that he was playing hurt. The Pistons finished 45-37, their best record in franchise history up to that point, but they were last in their division, missing the playoffs. Jimmy averaged 18 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 3 assists. The Pistons brought in Curtis Rowe as their top pick in 1971, as Bob was finally healthy. Detroit hired yet another new coach in Earl Lloyd, and he considered Jimmy a poor fit in the backcourt next to Dave. Despite what he thought about Jimmy, he was producing at a career level this year. He dropped 3 straight 30-point games in the first week, along with a career-high 44 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists against the Blazers. Since he was one of the top scorers in the league at the break, he made his second All-Star game. Even though he was having the best season of his career, the Pistons were still trying to trade him, as GM Ed Coyle had a deal in place to send Jimmy to Baltimore for Phil Chenier, but the deal fell through. Maybe the trade rumors were really getting to him, since his numbers took a sharp dive after the break. Bob really blossomed into one of the best centers in the league, but even though the Pistons had 3 20-point scorers, they couldn't find success, finishing 26-56. In his career year, Jimmy averaged 21 points, 3 rebounds, and 4 assists. The Pistons finally found a trade partner, and Jimmy would be sent to the Rockets for Stu Lance. When asked about the trade, Jimmy replied, "I'm not surprised at the trade. It's only disappointing to me in one respect. It seems as though I'm being traded as a scapegoat, a troublemaker. I don't like that title. It developed 3 or 4 coaches back when I missed a plane or something. These opinions have been passed on me purely from what people hear." Houston wasn't that much better than Detroit, but they did have some solid guys in Jack Marin, Rudy Tomjanovich, and Mike Newland. Jimmy would be a starter, mainly playing the point for the first time. He was highly productive in his new role, dropping 30 points, 4 rebounds, and 9 assists against Chicago, and 22 points, 4 rebounds, and 11 assists against Philly. Jimmy still scored his points, but he had 5 games with double-digit assists, as he was one of the top distributors in the league. He was one of 4 Rockets to average over 17 points a game, but their defense was their Achilles heel. Their 33-49 record wasn't good enough for the playoffs, as Jimmy averaged 18 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists. Jimmy would be on the move again, being sent to the Kansas City Kings for Matt Guokas. Tiny Archibald was struggling with injuries, so the Kings needed a starting caliber guard. Jimmy was hooping pretty early, averaging 20 points and 5 assists in November. He had 36 points and 6 assists against the Warriors, and 38 points, 4 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals against Portland. He was still scoring and passing like he used to, dropping at least 39 times, and dishing at least 5 assists in 34 games. Sam Lacey, Nate Williams, and Don Kojic all had solid seasons, but the Kings went through 3 different head coaches, finishing 33-49. Jimmy averaged 19 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal. The Kings drafted Scott Webman in 1974, and with Tiny Archibald healthy, Kansas City was at full strength. Jimmy played his part in the offense, dropping 4 20-point performances in the first 5 games. He put up 31 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 steals against the Suns, and 30 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists, and 2 blocks against the Braves. He was putting up decent numbers, but it seemed like he would never put up the production that was expected with his draft status. Tiny came back in a big way, while Sam had his best season as a pro. The Kings finally put it together, finishing 44-38, making their first playoff appearance since 1966. Jimmy averaged 17 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and a steal, as they faced the Bulls in the semifinals. This was Jimmy's first playoff series in 7 years, and he played pretty well, dropping 26 points and 6 assists in Game 2, and 30 points on 62% shooting in Game 4. However, these would be Kansas City's only wins as they lost the series in 6. Jimmy was a starter again in 1975, and he continued to be a solid scorer, even if he wasn't providing much else. He dropped 23 points, 3 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 steals against the Suns, and 32 points on 12 of 17 shooting against the Celtics. He had 27 20-point games this season, and Scott Webman made the All-Star team as a sophomore. Tiny was doing his thing, but the Kings just didn't have enough talent to contend, finishing 31-51. Jimmy averaged 16 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, and a steal. Jimmy had nearly missed last year's training camp due to a contract dispute, and the same issues came up again. The Kings felt like his salary was too expensive, and they waived him. Jimmy would retire at just 32 years old. In 1992, his son Jalen was a member of Michigan's 5-5. Jimmy had still never met Jalen, but when he was interviewed for a book on the Fab Five, he wrote a letter to his son. Jalen knew that he wasn't mature enough to read the letter, and he didn't open it for 8 years. In 2000, Providence alum Austin Croshere was drafted by the Pacers and was now Jalen's teammate. He gave Jalen a paper with his father's number on it. He eventually called the number, and he and his father spoke a few times. They planned to meet up, but Jimmy passed away in July 2007 from lung cancer. Jalen would say this: "I was hurt, saddened, and selfishly disappointed that we never got a chance to meet. You want to know something? We were supposed to meet this month. Jimmy Walker was the epitome of a can't-miss prospect during his time at Providence, and the Pistons picked him first overall because of it. However, he had a rough start to his career, considering that his coaches couldn't see him and Dave Bing working together in the same backcourt. As his weight increased, his dedication was called into question, and the doubt slowly began to creep in. But by his 3rd year, he finally got the opportunity and he broke out, becoming an all-star. He was an all-star again in his 5th year, but he still wasn't in the good graces of the Pistons' upper management. For some reason, he would never become the superstar that everyone thought he would be out of college. He wasn't a total bust, but it always seemed like he could have done a lot more in the league. Most people focus on the relationship between him and Jalen, but they forget how good of a player he was when he was actually locked in. Thank you guys, I really appreciate y'all. The story around Jimmy Walker it's like a weird story. This guy dominates in college, then you get to the league, you're the first overall pick. You go to a situation where you're already with a team that has a guy who plays exactly like you, but the coaches don't think that you guys could probably benefit off each other in the backcourt. You get sat down, and he comes back, and he gets the opportunity, and he plays, and this guy's really good. He can really score. Did you not see him in college? I feel like a lot of that stuff is also on him as well, because when you're showing up overweight, when you're not dedicating yourself to the process, people are not going to give you chances, especially at the pro level. I truly don't know why he couldn't. I mean, it's not like he didn't get the time. from year 3 on, he was a starter for most of his career. I guess like that switch didn't flip. I don't know. And I did not want to make this whole video about him and Jalen. I didn't. Like, of course you have to mention it, but personally, someone who abandons their son, I don't respect that decision. I don't. And it seemed that Jalen was sort of resentful for a lot of his young life because of that, because I read the articles, and when he said that stuff about Grant Hill, he's a suburban black kid, that's a direct result of you not having your father in the house. Like, but I feel like the relationship was kind of fractured from the beginning. I feel like Jalen used that as kind of like a motivation to be the best he could be in his own life. It's just a slippery slope. Like, I saw the comments where Jimmy said he could have said something when Jalen was coming up in Michigan. He's like, oh, I didn't want to look like that dad that only came around when his son was trying to be big. Man, I think Jalen would have wanted you there in any capacity. I don't think he would have cared about that, to be honest. I don't think Jalen would have really cared about that. But again, who am I to say? Jimmy Walker was a good player, man. He was a great player. He was a great player at Providence. He was a good NBA player, very good NBA player. But that's the most confusing part about this. Like, what was really the reason? Like, nobody really knows why he never really panned out. Nobody really knows. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate y'all. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to my channel. Turn my post notifications on if you haven't already. Thank you. Please be safe. I'm out. Peace.